Chapter 4, October 31st, 1967. Welcome to the RMS Queen Mary. Greetings and salutations. Good evening, darling, Mike Allen Sr. said while surrendering his boarding pass to the concierge. He swung his blazer over his right shoulder and leaned up against the desk. Mike wasn't very big on personal space. It was the 1960s, and he figured being formal was a way of the past. Mike Allen, here we go, the lanky concierge said while reading the name off the boarding pass. This is my first transatlantic voyage, Mike said in an attempt to drum up some rudimentary small talk with the front desk girl. You don't say. How exciting. You joined us on quite the most special of occasions, she said while running her fingers down the guest list. The lobby was brimming with a bodacious bevy of activity. Mike stuck out like a sore thumb. His presence was nowhere near as befitting as many of the other esteemed guests. The lobby was jam-packed with celebrities, debutantes, politicians, and various other social elites. The lobby was crammed up tight like toppings fighting over space on a supreme pizza. For a cop, Mike found the whole thing rather fantastical in nature. He was a man of simple tastes. He enjoyed top-shelf whiskey with bottom-shelf companions. Feeling a bit out of place? Darling, I'm feeling about as out of place as a bohemian in a boardroom. The concierge started gleefully giggling at Mike's colorful use of the English language. She took a second to appreciate his words, like a self-satisfied author stumbling upon a great simile. Embarkation is set promptly for 11:59 p.m. It looks like you have a reservation at Sir Winston's for 1 at 9 p.m. Oh, that's a mistake. Mistake? Oh no, what do you mean? I'd made plenty of mistakes in my time, darling. Not asking you to dine with me tonight won't be one of them. Without a moment's hesitation, the concierge glanced up from her desk. Her glasses were dancing on the brim of her nose. She slowly pushed up her glasses and stared at Mike with an intense interest. That's very presumptive of you, sir. My father goes by sir. You can call me Mike. You're impossible. Is that a yes? We'll see, she said while handing over the room key to Mike. He was satisfied enough in his remedial flirting skills to know he probably landed a companion for dinner. Mike tapped the key on the check-in desk and headed back to his room to freshen up. The room was centrally located about 50 yards from the front desk. After a quick walk down the main hallways, Mike arrived at his destination. The door to the room was made of a solid piece of maple and stained with a Purple Heart varnish. The sheen from the door reflected an outline of Mike's shadow, like viewing a silhouette through rose-colored glasses. Mike juggled his belongings while rummaging through his pockets for the room key. The hallway to the room was humid and as empty as a box of donuts left out at a police station break room. Mike pulled the key out and attempted to insert it into the keyhole. The tip of the key slashed against the keyhole a couple of times before it hit the target, like a rookie at the firing range sighting his target. Clearly, the drive-time commute to Long Beach had weighed heavily on Mike. Luckily for Mike, he was too exhausted to be frustrated. As the door swung open, a backdraft of stuffy air wafted in Mike's face. The room was pitch black, and Mike adjusted his eyes to search around for the light switch. Anemic beams of light crept into the room from the hallway. Mike moved his hands along the wall to locate the switch. After searching around the wall like a blind man reading Braille, Mike accidentally toggled on the lights. The room was brilliantly blooming in a bountiful array of colors, like a randomly assorted bouquet of flowers. The tapestries flowed with an elegant pearly white intertwined thread. They wafted in the wind like the echoes of waves crashing against the rocks of a shallow seashore. Mike turned his eye toward the bed and fell backwards into it. The bed caught him like a baseball to a newly broken-in baseball glove. After a few moments of rest, Mike found himself dozing off to sleep, like a college student fighting the last-minute fatigue of cramming all night for a midterm exam. Knock, knock, knock. The knocking was as abrupt as it was shocking. He hopped up from the lumpy mattress and sprang towards the door. Without pretext, Mike swung open the door in eager anticipation. To his chagrin, he was met with the presence of a 6'9" bellhop. "Hi." "Good evening, sir." "You aren't exactly who I was expecting. How can I help you?" "You left your bag at the front desk." "Oh, thanks," Mike said and pulled out his money clip. He fawned through a wad of cash only to arrive at an inordinate amount of freshly minted $20 bills. The bills were as crisp as a newly ripened gala apple. He pulled out a 20 from the money clip and handed it over to the bellhop. The bellhop swapped the bag for the 20 and continued to shove it into his front breast pocket. "By the way, Helen said she will meet you at 9 p.m. sharp." Mike smiled at the bellhop and pleasantly patted him on the shoulder. In the span of a few minutes, Mike was able to negotiate his way to Sir Winston's steakhouse. He sat eagerly at the table, waiting for the accompaniment of his soon-to-be dinner guest. The hands on his watch slowly paraded towards 9 p.m., like the slow, methodical marching of a soldier. "Is this seat taken?" Mike Allen turned his head and looked over his shoulder. He stood up and pulled out the chair for the lady. It was the 60s, the era of counterculture and challenging social norms. Mike was a little bit old school and maybe a little bit traditional, but he always found it stylish to show a modicum of chivalry. "Have you eaten here before?" "Have I? No. Have I wanted to? Yes." "Well, I'd have to say that we're in for quite the treat." "How's that?" "I heard the Italian food is to die for. Pizza, pasta, pomodoro. If every country ate pizza, we'd have world peace by now." Helen clamped onto her wineglass and swirled it around in elongated concentric circles, like a figure skater making figure eights on an ice rink. The glass produced a luminescent glow that projected onto her white spaghetti string dress. She clutched her glass in her left hand, brushed back her bangs with her right hand. Mike appreciated her honesty and resumed his relentless assault on his food. "Have some food with your salt, why don't you?" Helen held the salt shaker in her hand and said, "I love salt. Can't have a meal without it." "Can I ask you something?" "I don't see why not." "Dare I say you might be oversalting your food?" "Well, yeah. That's how I like it." "Well, that begs the question." "What question?" "How do you know to put salt on something if you haven't tasted it before?" "It needs more salt." "Yes, but how do you know it needs more salt without trying it first?" "How do the tides work? Nobody knows. Tides roll in, tides roll out. Nobody knows why." "Isn't it based on the moon or something?" "Who knows?" "I'm not an astronomer, but I think it's the moon." "The moon? Not exactly my cup of tea." "What exactly is your cup of tea? Let me guess. You're into flashy jewelry." "What gave it away?" Mike asked while rolling up his sleeves. His oversized gold-plated Cartier slid down his wrist and choked the top of his hand. Helen looked down at the watch and pointed with a stare. "Fair enough," Mike said while turning over his wrist and unlatching the watch. He held up the watch as it beckoned in the dimly lit restaurant. "Was it a gift?" "A gift? To put it mildly, it's a trinket. Spend 20 years on the job, and you get a boot to the trousers and a gold-plated watch." "On the job? What do you do for a living?" "I'm a homicide detective in the homicide capital of the world. Well, I guess I was up until I retired last week." Ding, ding, ding. Ding, ding, ding. "What's that?" she asked. "A captain's bell." "Captain's bell?" "It's an all-hands-on-deck call to the crew. Something is rotten in Denmark." Mike keenly observed the area to assess the scene. Most of the guests remained seated and attuned to their food. Polite society tended to mind their own business, especially in times of acute distress. That was the thing about emergencies. They tended to be a litmus test. During an emergency, most people run away from the danger, and some people run towards the danger. Mike tended to jump headfirst into the fray like a scrappy boxer rushing to the center of the ring. Mike expeditiously excused himself from the table and rushed towards the sound of the bell. Crew members scattered from all parts of the ship like a flock of seagulls around an open dumpster. Mike firmly grabbed one of the fleeing deckhands by the arm sleeve. The deckhand looked back at Mike with an almost ghostly appearance on his face. "What seems to be all the commotion about?" "We..." "Spit it out, son. I'm on the force. Maybe I can help," Mike said as he pulled out his detective shield and flashed it to the crewman. The deckhand pulled him in close and said, "We have an emergency." "Son, an emergency. Be more specific. What happened?" he asked while posting the ends of his fingertips into the man's chest cavity. "We have reports of a missing cabin full of passengers. A family, sir." "How can I help?" "You want to help? Then follow me." Mike and the deckhand raced over to the bridge like a race car pulling away from a pit stop. The various crew members had abandoned their post and funneled into the bulkhead around the bridge. The Queen hoisted over 25 lifeboats on the port side of the ship. As he ran, the capacious hallways became cluttered with crew. The bulkhead leading to the bridge was bustling with activity. Mike slowed down to survey the area as he made his approach. "Captain!" the deckhand shouted in a sultry tone of voice. The captain's attention was trained on a map of the ship. He was scouring the map for an idea where to look for the missing passengers. Mike stood adjacent to the captain, just outside his periphery view. The captain raised his right hand and placed it in front of the deckhand without saying a word. His focus was completely concentrated on the map, like a hunter staring down the scope of a rifle before a kill. "Captain, how long?" Mike asked. The captain broke his myopic concentration and turned his head to the stranger. "Who is this man, and why is he on my bridge?" "Someone please explain to this passenger—" "Detective. My name is Detective Mike Allen." "Oh, well, how nice. Well then, Detective Mike Allen, in case you weren't aware, you probably don't have jurisdiction in international waters. That badge says Long Beach Police Department, and you are smack dab in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Please be a good American and see yourself to your cabin." "By all means, Captain," Mike said, casually walking off the bridge. As he passed the threshold of the bridge to the galley, he turned and shouted, "How long?" "Okay, I'll bite. How long? How long for what? If I answer your question, will you kindly vacate my bridge?" "You have 48 hours to solve this case. If you don't have a lead or a suspect within the first 48 hours, your chances of solving the case drops by 99%. "I'll take that under advisement," he said dismissively to the desperate detective. The captain waved off the detective and continued searching the map for some inspiration. "You can stare at that map all day. You have over 2,100 guests and 1,100 crew members scattered across 12 decks. This boat is luxurious, but time is not a luxury you have on your side. Every minute we stand here with our dicks in our hand is one less minute we find those passengers." The captain stubbornly scratched the brim of his nose and readjusted his glasses. The captain raised his hand and led Mike back into the room. "How long?" "We think somewhere after 7 p.m. "Let's walk this back. How do you know they're missing?" "The passengers ordered room service at 7 p.m. John, our bellhop, delivered it, and that was that." "That was that?" "That was that." "What happened then?" "We figure somewhere between 7 and 9 the passengers went missing." "Figure? Figure how?" "The passengers in the cabin across the hall called into guest services somewhere around 9 p.m. The door to the room was left wide open. We sent up a deckhand to investigate." "And I take it, the room was empty when your deckhand showed up?" "Not exactly." "Captain, I appreciate your candor, but I believe we are well beyond pleasantries and euphemisms. Shall we dispense with the bullshit?" "Very well." The captain adjusted his uniform by pulling down on the bottom of his tie, like an Egyptian pharaoh repositioning a monolithic menhir. "The room. It was covered from floor to ceiling in blood." The captain instinctively started speaking with his hands to emphasize his words. Mike instinctively gulped and started rubbing his hands together in this slow, awkward rhythm. I'll need to speak with the bellhop and the deckhand immediately. Of course. John, front and center. Sir. The bellhop leapt next to the captain. This is Detective Mike Allen. He has some questions for you, son. Sir, I didn't see nothing. Mike interrupted the crewman and said, Sometimes the smallest details can make the biggest difference. You may not even know what you know. Okay. How can I help? Just tell me what happened, son. At approximately 7 p.m., Son, plain language. Tell me what happened in your own words. I went to deliver the food. The husband opened the door, and I rolled the cart into the room. What did they order? Cheeseburgers, fries, and milkshakes. Did he tip? The captain interjected for a moment. What does that matter? The bellhop scrunched his eyebrows and stared despondently down at the ground. I'm just trying to get a read of the situation. Mike slightly turned his head to the captain and shook his head. The captain immediately picked up on the cue and obliged the bellhop to answer. Son, answer the man's question. He did. Generously, the bellhop responded. So, husband opens the door, you walk the food in, he tips you, and you walk out. Yeah, like I said, I didn't see nothing out of the ordinary. Just a family having dinner. Mike slowly stroked his chin and pondered the situation. Tell me, how long have you been working on the Queen? Oh, this is I'd say going on 5 years now. So, you're familiar with the layout of the rooms? Familiar? You know, familiar. Do you have a good lay of the land? Could you tell if something was obviously out of place? Oh, yes. I'm very familiar with the room layout, sir. Was anything out of place? Anything at all? So far as I could tell, the room looked kempt. I was only there for a matter of minutes. Very good. That'll be all, sailor. John nodded at the detective and saluted the captain. The captain pulled Mike aside for a moment and asked, What does it matter what they ate? Lust, loathing, loot, and love. There are only 4 motives for murder. What does it matter what they ate? It didn't. I wanted to gauge his response. I wanted to read his body language. I wanted to sniff out my inconsistencies in his story. Well? He passed with flying colors. He's clean as a whistle. You pick your people well, Captain. How can you tell? His clothes, uniform, shoes are all spotless. Not a drop of blood on him. No signs of a struggle. No signs he did anything other than deliver cheeseburgers and milkshakes. I see. Like I said, clean as a whistle. So now what? Now we speak to your deckhand. Ah, yes. Olivia. Olivia Marie, I think her name is. Mike looked away from the map and turned to the captain with a spark of curiosity. You have a female deckhand? Interesting. She's an acquired taste from what the crew tells me. I haven't spent much time with her myself. Where is she? She's right out there on the deck. Well, no time like the present. Let's get her in here. The captain pointed at Olivia from the bridge and walloped a wholehearted whistle. She sprang into action and jogged into the bridge. She had a noticeable bulge around her waistline, almost like she shoved a pillow down her trousers. What's your name, sailor? Sir? She asked in a confused tone. It's okay, sailor. This is Detective Mike Allen. He's helping us to locate the missing passengers. Olivia stood at attention with her arms crisscrossed behind her well-pronounced shoulders. For a deckhand, she sure fit the archetypal mold. Olivia Marie, sir. Olivia, I need your help with something. We're somewhat behind the 8 ball and working on a truncated timetable. I'm going to ask fast questions and I expect some fast answers. You do that and we can be square. Mike shoved his hands into his pockets and rummaged around for a lighter. He pulled the nickel-plated Zippo from his right pocket and a pack of menthols from his left. It was a nasty habit, but often helped calm his nerves. Mike fidgeted around with the cigarettes while sizing up the deckhand. "I'm not sure I can help, sir. See, I just found the empty room." "Well, not exactly empty. I mean..." Mike prudently persisted with his pause. He always found solace in the awkward silence among strangers. Pausing often revealed the true intentions of a suspect. Make someone awkward enough, and they'll spill their deepest and darkest secrets. Mike loudly and intentionally flicked the Zippo open and closed. The Zippo made a distinctive clicking sound. "Tell me, what happened?" "Sometime around 9 p.m., I was called to conduct a routine wellness check on a guest." And I checked on the guests. And I arrived at the room around 9:15. It was, you know. It was what?
You know.
Humor me, Miss Marie.
It was covered completely in blood and bile.
"Elaborate if you would be so kind," Mike said while tamping down his cigarette carton.
"I'm not sure what to say."
"Say whatever comes to mind, dear. Nothing more, nothing less."
"The walls, they were covered in blood. The ceilings, the floor, the entire room was soaked in thick black crimson blood,"
Olivia Marie said while flailing her arms around like a couple of soggy pool noodles listing lazily in a pool. "But no bodies." She put her hands on top of her head and said,
"Bodies? Sir, I saw blood, turned tail, and ran. No bodies, just blood. There was so much blood."
"Interesting." Mike took a moment to digest her disjointed answer. He pulled the unlit cigarette from his mouth and started twirling it between his fingers like a drummer twirling a drumstick. "I think I'd like to see the room now." Mike stared at the crew members for some guidance. No one budged an inch. He was confused by the lackluster response or sense of urgency from his crew. There was an abnormal amount of passive resistance to his request. For a detective of his caliber, this seemed like a rather benign request. "Can we go to the room?" "When?" the captain asked. "When? No time like the present."